welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. And joining me today is Gloomhaven, Frosthaven designer, Isaac Childres. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we are living in exciting times. This is amidst the COVID outbreak right now. How's social distancing going for you?
Yeah, honestly, it's very little has changed for me personally. I just work from home anyway. My wife is home more now, so that's nice.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, it's just business as usual.
How big is the Cephalofair team?
We just hired our third employee, so it's me and two other guys now.
Everyone working from home?
Yeah, we all work from home. So one lives out in California, the other up in Michigan, and I'm in Indiana. So yeah, we don't have an office or anything. We all just work from home.
Okay. Well, one of the interesting things about the Frosthaven Kickstarter, which hasn't launched yet as of the recording of this, is that you announced that there was going to be a 1-week delay till March 31st for this. And that totally makes sense, though it's kind of an abstract announcement saying that, the COVID outbreak is going on, you want to accommodate as many backers as possible, and you needed to adjust to things. What does a 1-week delay actually let you accomplish? Like, what's the practical reasoning for a week versus a month or versus not delaying at all?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I had two main reasons. One was just kind of more personal. Like, I was just feeling a little apprehensive about the whole thing, sort of the week leading up, or I guess, when was that? Basically, starting 2 weeks ago, there, just a lot of changes with how people were operating and, how the government was operating and how everything was operating. And yeah, it felt like just kind of like a turbulent, chaotic experience of that week of just okay, now we're all just going to stay in our houses and we really shouldn't go outside at all to do anything, to limit the spread of the disease. And so I just kind of wanted to just settle into that new reality a little bit more before I don't know, just personally launching this other big chaotic thing that was going to have all these other implications. And then secondly, we just needed more time, with a lot of people working on the projects now, having their kids, stay at home all day. There's just less time to do things necessarily. And so I don't have any kids personally, but a lot of other people on the project were sort of experiencing that type of thing. And so, and I also, so we could have launched this last week, but I just felt like I was causing unnecessary stress on a lot of people to get it done by that time, right, especially with all the other stress. So we decided to, let's push it back a week. We don't need more stress at this point in our lives.
Are you still nervous at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot to do in the next 3 days. And then who knows what's going to happen when it actually launches, with this new reality that we live in. But yeah, I mean, it's a good kind of nervous. I think it'll be exciting.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a pretty monumental Kickstarter because, of course, Gloomhaven is this critical darling. It's this monumental success. There's going to be tons of people who are going to want to get Frosthaven just based off the pedigree alone, regardless of what you're throwing in it. But it also looks like you're throwing in a ton of stuff. When you were originally working on Gloomhaven, did you feel like there was a possibility of it becoming this phenomenon, or did you just think this Uber box was going to be some niche thing that a few people might be interested in?
It's hard to say. It's I kind of expected that it would be, I don't know, bigger than my last game, the first game that I made, Forge War. I kind of recognized that the gameplay of this was going to reach a larger audience because it was more of a dungeon crawl type thing, and that I had a lot of fun playing it. So I yeah, I had hopes that it would find success. I mean, you can't really predict like the amount of success it's actually
Right,
had.
right.
So I mean, it certainly went above any of my wildest expectations. But yeah, I mean, I was hoping for a good amount of success.
Yeah. Well, I mean, probably the most remarkable thing about it to me is that when you talk about accessibility of games and you talk about games that are good for non-gamers or, converting video gamers over to tabletop games, you typically talk about slowly getting them ready via lighter games. And somehow this monstrous box broke through into the mainstream. I mean, you see it recommended on all kinds of video game websites, on all kinds of, tabletop gaming websites that would otherwise be recommending lighter games. I mean, it's just had this really remarkable breakthrough. And I imagine that there's some pretty big pressure between Frosthaven and Jaws of the Lion to kind of follow up and add to that. When you were embarking on these projects, how did you want to, I guess, make your sophomore Gloomhaven feel fresh and new, but live up to that expectation?
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. Like I said, like just how wide of an audience like Gloomhaven has found. Like that to me has been unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Just with how like crazy and ridiculous it is. It's a very large barrier of entry to get into it. With all the setup and the organization and just like all the different components and the 50-page rule book, it's a massive thing. And so yeah, that has been surprising. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of why we decided to launch Jaws of the Lion. Was like we've seen so much success given this huge barrier of entry. Like, it was kind of like, what if we took that and lowered the barrier of entry as much as possible? Would that see even more success, or just a success with a different audience that wasn't necessarily going to get into Gloomhaven, or because they're newer gamers, maybe they shouldn't get into Gloomhaven, because of all like the rules overhead and everything. So that was kind of the philosophy behind Jaws of the Lion, was to like take a step back and make like a normal game. And just see how that went. And then at the same time, I also wanted to, continue, the big epic experience of Gloomhaven, and give, everyone who loves Gloomhaven something else to play with as well. And so, that's why we're doing Frosthaven, which is, just more of like just, the sequel in terms of just like it's going to be this huge thing with lots of components and lots of rules, and for those people who love that sort of thing. And then of course we're also adding a bunch of new stuff as well, like the town building and the extra resources, and new classes and new monsters and all that sort of good stuff.
And that stuff sounds so exciting. I mean, personally, the thematic changes. I'm Alaskan, so I'm all about tall pine trees and snow drifts and all that kind of stuff. The barbaric North, way into it. I'm so looking forward to that. But Jaws of the Lion is really interesting because even for someone like me who, I've played plenty of Gloomhaven, and I have played tons of really hardcore tabletop games, the stage of my life right now where I'm sharing games with either younger gamers or more inexperienced gamers, that kind of tutorialization is really exciting to me. So I may actually be more excited for Jaws of the Lion than Frosthaven, which is
cool.
Kind of surprising. But speaking of Jaws of the Lion, is the COVID pandemic going to affect the release? Because that's going direct to retail, right?
So it hasn't really affected anything yet. So far we're sort of in the middle of production right now. And China is like fairly under control at this point, and like our factory in Shenzhen was pretty far from the main outbreak in Wuhan. So There was like a bit of a delay, like around Chinese New Year. Like basically,
Hmm.
there was a week or two after Chinese New Year where everyone didn't go back to their jobs. But other than that week or two, which we've kind of like folded into some other things, it's looking pretty good so far. But the future is still uncertain, right? So I mean, once we get to the shipping process, how easy will it be to ship it to the States? And then once it gets to the States, like, how easy will it be to get to the fulfillment center? And then, like, will the fulfillment center even be open? So these are kind of outstanding questions. So, like, we're moving along on schedule so far, and we'll just have to see from there.
A lot of variables. Do you have like a target time or an adjusted target time now in which you're hoping to get into some window for release?
Yeah. So we are the it's like end of July or early August is the retail release of the product. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people are going to be super excited about that. Now, I know that from what you've announced that this is going to be all new material, so there's going to be stuff that people can integrate directly into their Gloomhaven experience, add it to their treasure box. So theoretically, experienced Gloomhaven players may want to pick this up to play through. The tutorialization is optional in the game, right? Like you can play through on a more hardcore mode as though it were regular Gloomhaven, or you can do the my first Gloomhaven experience with it.
Yeah, so like the first three scenarios, you're kind of playing with a limited hand set, like with some using very simplistic mechanics for the monsters and everything. So yeah, that might be like a little boring for people who've obviously played a lot of Gloomhaven before. Though then again, like you can get through it really quickly if you want to, or you can just kind of start with scenario 4. I mean, it is like a cohesive story that starts with scenario 1, so you probably want to at least like read the text for those scenarios, even if you don't play them. And then it's pretty easy to just like come up with some rewards that you would get if you skip those first 3 scenarios, because you're not actually earning a lot of experience and money in those, because like experience and money haven't been introduced yet. So yeah, it's pretty easy to yeah, like skip to the good part.
Well, you're talking about it being, potentially boring for a really experienced Gloomhaven player, but what about for a Gloomhaven designer? Did you find the limitations trying to scale back as much as possible like compelling or
Yeah.
infuriating, or like what was the feeling in approaching this very, very different beast?
Yeah, that was definitely like a very interesting design challenge of like, let's take this giant box and do like everything we can to just like make it as approachable as possible. Um, and yeah, so like a lot of work like went into that, like first 5 scenarios and the tutorialization of everything, and we sort of put together a rule book, like a learn to play guide, essentially, where so you read some rules and you play a bit, and you read some more rules and you play a bit, so you can kind of like learn as you play. That was like a lot of the focus of the last like few months of the development process. But yeah, and just like taking all the cardboard tiles and turning it into like a book that you play on the book itself was like a big step. And then just but at the same time though, like I didn't want to like pare down the mechanics, like the core mechanics of the game itself,
Right,
because like I
right.
still wanted it to be that same system that everyone loves. Like I didn't want to if it's not broke, don't fix it, sort of thing. I mean, I did like tweak it a little bit, took out some of like the eccentricities of it, like rolling modifiers, and I don't know, there was like a big list of things like retaliate and pierce, and so some conditions that like weren't that used that often and could kind of like be paired out without losing too much of that complexity.
How tricky was it to balance the need for ease of play versus having something that more experienced players might be interested in getting with the characters themselves? Because ultimately you want a character that is accessible to the person who Jaws the Lion might be the only Gloomhaven experience that they ever get into, but it really sounds like you also want to make it something that's attractive to the experienced player who is the completionist and wants everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the characters were a lot of fun to design as well because I'm approaching it from that standpoint of like, yeah, I want to make these characters interesting, but I also don't want to make them too complicated. And so yeah, a lot of thought went into that. And ultimately, there was the whole thing with the Necromancer, where originally, like, the Necromancer was that was the fourth character in Jaws of the Lion, and it was just too complicated. And I sort of had the choice of like remove a lot of the complication from the class, but then lose a lot of its charm. That it was one of my favorite classes I've ever designed. So I decided to like move it to Frosthaven and like start again, making a new fourth class. That ended up being the Void Warden, which in itself is like probably the most complicated of the four, but I think it's at least more straightforward than the Necromancer was. But yeah, there it is. A lot of work went into creating those characters, and it was very interesting.
Well, as the most experienced Gloomhaven player out there, what do you think is the most compelling element of Jaws of the Lion? Like the thing that you would, as a player, as someone who wasn't part of the development of this game, you would look at and go like, oh man, this is so cool. I can't wait to bring this over to another set, or, this is what really made it a complete and worthwhile pursuit for me to get this learn to play Gloomhaven set.
Yeah, like you mentioned, like the tutorial, I think ended up like really nice in terms of like something that you can ideally like put in front of anybody and get them to learn Gloomhaven over these 5 scenarios. Mm-hmm. So that's really exciting for me. Having that thing that you can then like reach a wider audience with. I made some like really cool bosses in the game too that I'm really excited about.
Well, those are some of the best moments, right? Is having a really good boss and then feeling like you had a good time overcoming it, giving it some unique behaviors and everything. Yeah. But, of course, in our limited time to talk today, I can't spend all that time talking about Jaws of the Lion. So, Frosthaven. Dude, this thing looks massive. I saw some of it at PAX Unplugged this last year, which I hope there's going to be a PAX Unplugged this year. But in this game, did any of this start out as an expansion to Gloomhaven that kind of ran away and became its own standalone game? Or did any of it start as like a second edition of Gloomhaven that just kind of evolved into its own thing? Like, what were your origins for Frosthaven?
I mean, back since I was like designing content for Gloomhaven, like I knew I wanted to, make new stories and like explore more of this world. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like going up north into the snow, like just seemed like a natural choice to me. And so like very early on, and you can even see it, like there are hints about this northern area in Gloomhaven. Mm-hmm. So like basically like from the beginning, like I knew I wanted to make this sequel. And that my intention was always just to like make as much content as was in the original Gloomhaven. So like this whole new big like campaign full of all this new stuff. I mean, there were a couple of ideas that I would have liked to have implemented in Gloomhaven, like the calendar system and some of like the city building aspects. But yeah, it was just like too much to bite off and chew at that point. It was a giant enough thing, and I had enough to do at that point. So I decided to, I'll just wait, for the next game to try and implement those things.
Hey, that's what the cutting room floor is for, is, recycling. You always just, instead of throwing that away, you put that in a drawer and then you come back to it and you say, hey, this was a good idea. Let's re-implement it here where we have the space to do that.
Yeah.
So with Frosthaven, you have, is it a flat 100 new missions? Is it over 100 new missions? Like what's the tagline there?
It's over 100 missions. And I say that because there are, I forget the count at the moment. It's like 62 or 63 maybe like story missions
Mm-hmm.
that have been designed. Whereas in Gloomhaven there were like 51 story missions and then like 44 side scenarios.
Right.
So I'd like to have a similar amount of side content as well. But all that like hasn't been designed yet. And a lot of that is because like I'm bringing in a lot of guest designers, and I've kind of like left it up to them on how many scenarios they create, like whether they just want to do one or they want to do like a whole quest chain. So that's the side scenarios are still very much in flux right now, but I'm pretty sure it'll be over 100. So that's what I'm calling it for now.
Well, one of the risks with role-playing games, and here I'm actually talking about like computer and console role-playing games, is that when you find yourself in this really extensive game where you are playing and essentially doing the same thing over again, just with escalated monsters and escalated abilities, but you can eventually start seeing through the matrix, so to speak, and you realize that you're doing the same thing over and over again. You know, you've had nearly 100 missions of Gloomhaven. How do you address the missions in order to make them continually interesting and compelling on their own, so it doesn't just become this grind of regurgitating the same experience over and over and over again?
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge. And one way to combat that is just with new characters and new monsters, right? So it's like you're always seeing a different puzzle, right? I mean, like playing one scenario with one character is completely different than playing it with another character. But then also, yeah, just adding variability to the scenarios themselves. So we're trying to like move away from the sort of kill all enemies scenarios that a lot of people have complained there was like too much of that in Gloomhaven, especially at the beginning. And so yeah, we're just trying to do different things with the scenarios, and I've sort of had a lot of practice with that over the last 3 years with the community-driven campaigns, where I just like go crazy and do crazy things in those scenarios. And I've really like tried to use that as like a learning experience to, just keep my creativity flowing and just like making stuff that's cool and interesting.
Was any of the experience in designing Jaws of the Lion impacting how you were rolling out the initial missions in Frosthaven? Like, did you think more about accessibility than you did when you were designing the original Gloomhaven missions? Like, one of the things that I heard again and again and again from people when Gloomhaven first came out is, don't worry about the first two missions. They're like the two hardest missions. Once you're beyond that, then, it gets a lot more manageable. So don't let that discourage you. Did you think about that scaling difficulty and how to accommodate a fresh new Gloomhaven player with Frosthaven 2?
I will admit that like less thought went into that, and I think you can kind of see that like with the 6 starting characters, which are all like very much complicated and probably more complicated than a lot of the characters from Gloomhaven. So yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of like took all that hand holding and put it in Jaws of the Lion and just kind of went crazy on Frosthaven. Because I guess the main focus was just to like give fans of Gloomhaven just like more interesting stuff to play with. But yeah, I mean, I think the scenarios still like do probably get more complicated as you progress through, but it doesn't. It's like starts at like a higher baseline, I think.
So one of the things about standalone base games, games that can be combined with content, but you can also just play right out of the box, is that sometimes they have a tendency to be viewed as the newer edition, the fresher and maybe more polished version of the original game. I think an example of where you can see that is like in Plaid Hat Games' Dead of Winter. And then they released Dead of Winter: The Long Night, and you had reviewers saying, actually, I would just say dive right into this. How did you account for that so people didn't start viewing Frosthaven as Gloomhaven's second edition, like the definitive version, and you know what, don't even bother with the original game anymore?
I don't know. I mean, is it necessarily a problem? Like if I, if we take Gloomhaven and we make it better in like every way that we can,
Right.
I see that as a good thing. I mean, Gloomhaven still provides like an entirely like different and huge amount of content on its own, right?
Right.
With all the, I mean, all the 17 character classes and 95 scenarios and whatever. Like, so yeah, it's just more stuff. I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily see it as a problem.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily see it as a problem either. Though I do know, like, one of the things that I've been thinking of a lot about with tabletop gaming, I don't worry so much about the tabletop gaming bubble or anything. What I do see as a trend is that as we have more legacy games and campaign games and these games that are
Yeah.
meant to be like lifetime experiences, you have to start being more selective about what you do, especially if you're trying to juggle multiple different campaigns at the same time with different groups of friends. It almost sets up like this stressful set of obligations. And so I wonder how sustainable this could be. Is there going to be a market for Gloomhaven 3 down the road where it's only a couple years after it, or if it ends up being diminishing returns? I mean, I'm sure that it's going to sell perfectly fine. I don't think Frosthaven has any issues, let alone Gloomhaven 3, but I do worry a little bit about Gloomhaven 4 and 5 and 6.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I've definitely experienced that sentiments from a lot of people. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they're diminishing returns. Um, and yeah, there is just a lot of board games out there, right? And there's just not enough time to play them all. But at the same time, like, I mean, there's a wide spectrum of people, right? I mean, I've had people who, finished Gloomhaven like, a month after it came out. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, I mean, they played it solo. They just like sat down and played it for like a month straight. And then they messaged me like, "I'm done. When's the next one?" I'm like, "What?
Yeah.
Anyway. um, and then there's people who like hopefully like in a year when Frosthaven comes out, they'll have finished their Gloomhaven campaign and be ready for more content, or maybe they're working on Forgotten Circles right now, and by in a year they'll be finished with that. And yeah, there are people who've had Gloomhaven for 3 years and maybe only played like a few scenarios over that time, and yeah, it might be another 10 years before they need more content. But I mean, I don't know. I tried to like, well, not that I tried to wait, but like, I guess it was fairly intentional that like it's now like 3 years later since Gloomhaven came out that I'm finally releasing like Frosthaven, and it's not going to be coming out for another year. So essentially like 4 years after Gloomhaven came out. So I don't know. I felt like that was an appropriate amount of time to like give people to like finish this big thing. And so, yeah, it's not like, 2 years after Frosthaven comes out, like there'll be like a Gloomhaven 3 or whatever. Like, if I do more giant campaign games, like I do want to give people the time to like, experience them fully and not feel stressed about like rushing to complete them. But like I said, like there's a whole spectrum of people. So yeah, I mean, some people might still feel rushed, and I don't know. You just kind of like got to hit that middle point, I think.
Totally. Well, one of the things I really like about this project is it does feel like this is Isaac Unleashed, right? Like this is where you're like, people have already experienced Gloomhaven, so I can make those more complicated characters, right? You were just mentioning tutorialization, we'll save that for Jaws of the Lion, and then Frosthaven, we can have these more complicated characters right off the bat. You have like a character who has independent decks, like with independent arms and everything, right? So what was the limit where you said this is a character that is just too complicated? Did you have a lot of stuff that you had to leave on the cutting room floor so far, or are you still just like, hey, any idea that I'm having, this is going to get packed right into here?
uh Yeah, no, I mean there was no character too complicated. I mean, I will say that the Geminate is the most complicated class in Frosthaven, and it is a starting character. So like, there's nothing like more complicated than that.
Right.
And also, that was more like Marcel Unleashed. He's the one who designed that class. He's the designer of Forgotten Circles.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I've also designed some pretty complicated classes for Frosthaven as well. But yeah, I mean, there hasn't been anything so far that has been like, oh no, that's too crazy.
Okay, well, what's an example of something that's really crazy that you think people are going to be really excited about? Like that is such a powerful thematic and interesting mechanical idea, right? To have independent decks to operate different aspects of a character. Like, how did you go that buck wild with another character?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to like spoil anything.
Oh, come on. What are podcasts for, man?
But I mean, I would say like the Blink Blade, which is another starting character, is pretty crazy as well. Just in the fact that, you know, each turn you go fast or slow, which essentially like turns, you know, the two abilities you have on your card into like four separate abilities depending on which mode you're in. And, you know, so, and also like plus like the two basic abilities you have on each card. So now you can do like 6 things with any one of your 10 cards in your hand. So yeah, that was a little wild. And then I don't know. There are other things.
to be seen by the audience. Well, you added plenty to this game. I mean, you have the city building and the weather seasonal mechanics, which I want to get to, but I do want to know about your feelings towards legacy games, because legacy games were like a really, really popular thing for like a hot second, and they still are, but I see more often now things are getting marketed as legacy when what they mean is that there's like pervasive elements that happen throughout a campaign. So really it's just a campaign game, right? You're not actually destroying cards, you're not making permanent changes. And I feel like you even kind of scaled back a little bit from that with the original Gloomhaven, because you came out with the stickers, you know, which were able to peel off rather than making those permanent changes. Are there true legacy elements to Frosthaven where you will make permanent, irreparable changes to your game components, or is this going to be soft legacy where you might be opening packages throughout a campaign and discovering new stuff, but you could theoretically reset everything to day one?
I mean, yeah, I'd say it's more on the softer side. Like, it's very similar to Gloomhaven in that respect, you know, where you have stickers that you can place on things, but we'll have removable stickers. And that's like the main thing. I mean, yeah, you can rip up your event cards if you want. We also have like these like punch out folders, like similar to the dossiers in Pandemic Legacy, which, you know, are kind of like, you can't really reset that as well, you know, where it's like, you know, there's like hidden information that you'll punch out. So it's kind of like see between like 2 layers of a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I enjoy legacy games. Like Pandemic Legacy, you know, is a fantastic experience. Both seasons have been like 2 of my favorite like gaming experiences of all time. And I don't know, like for me, I'm not sure it's necessarily like been about like the destroying things like aspect of that game, but yeah, right. It is more about just those persistent elements and feeling like, you know, something you did in one game session is now going to affect you in future game sessions. Like, to me, like I think that's the really interesting part of legacy or campaign games. So that's really kind of what I've tried to focus on. And yeah, so and also like I do want to try and accommodate like both types of people, right? So if you want to like put stickers on everything and destroy all your stuff, like that's totally cool, and like I can certainly see how like that enhances an experience. But also like if you don't want to do that and you want removable stickers, you know, I don't want like that to like turn you off from experiencing an otherwise great game.
Yeah, and I think there is differences between a game like Pandemic Legacy and a game like Gloomhaven, right? Like I think the tension and kind of the almost action movie or suspense movie element of Pandemic really lends itself well to like committing to this irreparable decision that will have long-term consequences, and it's more about the overall experience that you have, and it's not this box that you are hoping to save to play with your children and grandchildren. But
Yeah.
you did bring up Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and Season 2, and one of the things that I found most refreshing about Season 2 is that the designers kind of played with how the campaign structure would go. Like certain things would happen, and you had more of a sandbox, so to speak, in
Yeah.
how missions unfolded. It was a little bit less linear. Did you actually change the campaign structure in Frosthaven? I know you said you're still developing some of that, especially the side missions, but is it going to be an overall similar experience to how Gloomhaven was, going from beginning to end of the campaign, or is there a new approach to how you navigate that?
I mean, yeah, I'd say it's a little less linear than Gloomhaven, but like, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily consider Gloomhaven very linear either. Um, I mean, yeah, ultimately, like there is an ending, but it does. There's a lot more like branching paths.
Of course, with the map and being able to choose what missions you go to and everything. But I mean, I guess I'm not trying to draw the comparison of Gloomhaven is Season 1 of Pandemic Legacy. More so, did you want it to be a similar experience to Gloomhaven, or did you want Frosthaven to unfold in a different way? Because you are bringing these other elements in, right? You have the season conditions, you have the
Right.
the town building elements. Do those present interesting campaign related choices that wouldn't have otherwise been possible in the system in Gloomhaven?
Yes. Yeah. And I think. Yeah, I think people will see more of that. I guess there's sort of like three main branches to the story. You're kind of like focusing on three different major threats that are sort of coming into the city, and then yeah, like which one of those you focus on will kind of will change like what threats you have to deal with like when winter comes, and also like how you build up the city will also affect like how how punishing those threats become. So yeah, there are a lot more knobs that you can turn to change your experience.
One of the things with the popularity of Gloomhaven that I've thought about quite a bit, and really with the popularity of a lot of games that have come out recently, is the impact that must have on the designer themselves, and how surreal it must be to kind of live in this celebrity like world among board gamers, right? You go to a convention and suddenly people are like, oh dude, Isaac is over there, Isaac's there, and you see a different level in different games. Someone might say, oh, the designer of this game has announced that there's an expansion or given this clarification. But if it's Jamie Stegmaier or Isaac Childres, it's Jamie said this or Isaac said this, as if it's someone that everyone knows and is well acquainted with. How was that adjustment for you? Are you still in that surreal stage, or are you like, well, this is my life. I am the Isaac Childress now.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely weird sometimes. As when I go on Board Game Geek and I like see people like talking about me, like, oh, Isaac said this and Isaac said that, and it's it's like for a second it's just like, oh, that's weird. That's a weird thing that's happening right there. But then you're like, oh yeah, I guess that's my normal life now. But yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting, and like I'm a fairly like introverted person. I feel like I've gotten a little better with that, with this whole phenomenon that's happened around me. But but like it's nice for me because like it is just like within that board game sphere, right?
Right.
So like my day-to-day life like doesn't really change at all. Like I'm just sitting at home working, like doing working at this great job that I love. And I go to the grocery store and like nobody recognizes me at the grocery store. I can just buy groceries like a normal person.
Right.
And then just like, yeah, if I go online or when I go to a convention, like I can get like this completely different experience. Yeah, where like now I'm kind of like this weird like rock star figure. it's it's I mean it's a weird experience, but also like it can be kind of fun.
Totally.
It's a nice ego boost in a way, and just also just like being able to interact with people who like just love this thing that you created, and tell you stories about how it's like brought their whole family like closer together, and it's just like a really great experience to just like interact with those fans and these people who are just like loving like what you've created. It's I don't know, it's just a great feeling. So it's kind of nice to like have both worlds, to just like be able to live my normal life, but then also like have this other like completely different like weird crazy experience of just like having these fans who've been like so like greatly affected by this thing that you've made.
Having 5,000 people walking around a convention with Frosthaven horns on, right?
Yeah. That was a pretty surreal experience. Yeah.
Well, I do want to get into some of the nitty gritty on Frosthaven before I let you go. So the weather system and the city building are, to me, two of the most intriguing aspects of this whole thing. I think this is probably because I was a big JRPG gamer during the Super Nintendo and PlayStation era, and I hear city building, I'm like, dude, is this like Breath of Fire 3 with the fairy city? What's going on here? So, you talked about how these might have been things that germinated when you were originally designing Gloomhaven, and then you implemented them here in Frosthaven. Tell me about the city building itself. Like, how does that actually look between missions, and what is the experience that you're going for the gamer?
Yeah. I mean, so the experience I'm going for is just like I don't know. I guess it's to give players like more to think about and more decisions outside of combat. It's just to in sort of a pervasive way of like this decision that I make is going to have like long-term consequences on my campaign, and also yeah, I mean, and the way it works, right, is that during a scenario when you're picking up loot, like a lot of that loot is going to be just like building resources like wood and metal and hides. And then you sort of, collect that on your character sheet. And then when you go back to town, you can spend those resources to either build buildings or use them at specific buildings. So you have like a craftsman building that has a list of items that you can make, and so you pull out those item cards, and on the item cards you can see like this one takes like a wood and a metal to make, and so you would spend those resources to get the item. So you kind of have to make that decision of not only like which building do I want to build, but also like if I want to use those resources for weapons and stuff instead to make my job easier within a scenario.
And give me an example of the buildings themselves, in like why you might choose one building versus another, and what might be the potential ramifications for that down the road.
So yeah, you've got a lot of buildings. Well, yeah, you have some buildings like the craftsman and like the alchemist who are gonna like if you like spend resources to improve those buildings, you're gonna get a wider variety of recipes that you can make. You also have some like resource generating buildings like a logging camp and a mine. So those take a lot more resources, like a lot more investment to like build those up. But when you do, now they're going to give you like resources over time. So it's kind of like a little engine building thing. And then a lot of the buildings, there's a barracks, and there you also like need to repair the walls around the city is going to increase your defenses, which will come into play like if you get attacked during like a city event.
Is that challenging to balance? Like, thinking about the ramifications of one building versus another over the course of a huge campaign like this, I mean, that's got to be hard to test and really see what are the chinks in the armor, what is going to like completely overpower a character, you know, the synergies between certain buildings, allowing for certain resources, and, you know, characters being able to farm that in certain ways. Like, was that a unique challenge, and did you have to scrap any ideas when you were in the midst of working on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about. There was some spreadsheets.
There's always spreadsheets.
uh, but I think, I mean, one of the design goals was to, I mean, you know, I wanted it to be like there to be like this threat in the game, you know, of this approaching winter, and then once you get into winter, like, you know, you start getting attacked. But like, there are no mechanics for like just like completely wiping you out and like destroying the city and game over. Like, that's not a thing. So like, even if you maybe don't make the correct decisions, or you know, you focus too much on building your own characters up and not enough on building the town up, you know, you might have a rough winter, but, you know, eventually the winter will end, and then, you know, the cycle goes back to the beginning, and so then you can maybe spend more time, you know, correcting your mistakes. So yeah, I mean, I think people have different experiences with it, and, you know, it's difficult to, you know, play test what all those different experiences will be. But I think it's like a fairly robust system to where, yeah, some people may have an easier time than others, but I think it'll still be interesting either way.
And the weather itself, like, what does that allow you to do as a game designer who's making this new campaign? You know, what are the impacts on the characters, on the players, and what does that bring as far as a new experience other than a nice thematic thing of, oh, winter's here and something happens?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the main way it's implemented is in the event cards, right? So instead of just having two decks of like a road and city events, you now have four decks where you have summer road and winter, and then summer road and city, and winter road and city. So when you switch over to that winter, now you're dealing with these other decks of cards, which are just very different in terms of now your town itself, like whenever you go back to town, whereas in the summer it's usually like, oh, you get rewarded, you know, you find some wood, or, you know, somebody comes to town and wants to sell you something. And now it's more just like, well, now there's a lot of hardships that you have to face, and you have to spend resources in order to keep people happy, and things like that. And then also, yeah, we're playing around with doing other things with time as well, where maybe some scenarios themselves might be only accessible during certain periods of time, or yeah, just like might be accessible only in the summer or in the winter, or like maybe the scenario is only available for a certain amount of time, like because you're tracking time as you progress. Maybe, you know, this scenario is only going to be available for like 3 time units, and then if you don't do it, then it's, you know, it's locked out. So various things like that.
Are Frosthaven and Jaws of the Lion fail forward games? Like, if you fail a mission, you still go on to the next thing, or do you replay the mission all over again?
It's the same system as Gloomhaven, where, yeah, if you fail it, you still get to keep your, you know, money and rewards and experience and everything, but you have to replay it.
Did you ever think for a little bit, maybe I should change this around? Because that is an accessibility issue for a lot of people, and making sure that they have momentum. Obviously, people have stuck with Gloomhaven and, you know, they like the system that it is. But I know that more and more campaign games over the last couple of years have kind of started changing into a system where, okay, if you fail, maybe that'll have ramifications, or you get less experience or something, but you move on to the next story beat. Or maybe there's a negative story thing that happens, but you still get to carry on into the next mission, so you don't feel like you're stuck on a particularly hard mission.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's it's an idea. I mean,
it's never been in the cards. You've never considered it.
Not really. I don't think I have. I mean,
Isaac Childres says, "Get good."
I don't know. It's just, I think I mean, Gloomhaven in a lot of ways obviously is like inspired by video games, and you rarely see that in video games. It's like it's play this level until you get it, until you get it right, and then when you do get it right, you got this great sense of accomplishment that like, okay, I figured it out. I made some mistakes first time around, but now I know what I'm doing and I got through it, and I think it's a more rewarding experience that way.
I think so. Though you could argue that in a video game, your save point isn't 2 hours ago where you have to restart with setting up all over again, right?
It depends on the video game, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay, well, with Frosthaven, what has been like the most challenging aspect of the design leading up until this point? The thing that was the biggest hurdle that you had to overcome.
In Frosthaven, the biggest hurdle.
It all came naturally. You're the Isaac Childres after all, right?
Well, it's not like it's came naturally. It's just like I've been very slowly working on it, like over the past 3 or even like 3.5 years now. So I don't know. It's hard to necessarily like remember. Not just remember, but it's just like it's just been like percolating in my head for all that time. So like it's if I come across a challenge, like just think about it for 6 months and then sort of thing. So there haven't been any like big hurdles yet that I can necessarily think of. Not that it hasn't been challenging. It's just I've had so much time to work on it. So we'll see in the next 6 months like whether I come across any big hurdles.
Well, Cephalofair has changed as a company, and your profile has changed. You can rely on a lot of guest designers and everything. What's the biggest change leading up to Frosthaven versus when you were leading up to getting ready to kickstart Gloomhaven?
Well, okay, yes. I mean, I guess I could say that's like the biggest hurdle. Like it's not a design hurdle, but it's just like the fact that I now have like a company to run. Whereas before, when I was just making Gloomhaven, I don't know, like it wasn't necessarily like a company at that point. I mean, I still had a game I had previously made, and there were some like replacement parts I had to send out for that, but it was like on such a smaller scale that it was very easy to just like focus all my time on making Gloomhaven. Whereas now there's like so many other like Gloomhaven products we're working on, and like we're trying to launch this web store, and there's just like replacement parts has become like this whole like giant nightmare of an issue that we're more or less solved to this point. Well, up to the point where our fulfillment center got closed down, but I'm just saying like there's lots of like other issues at play that take up a lot of my time like during the day, and so it's harder to just like sit down and design at this point. For sure. So I mean that's definitely been the biggest hurdle, and I think that also like plays into your answering what's different this time around as well.
Yeah, for sure. And management comes with its own complications, and making sure that people are able to do their jobs. And then the coronavirus is its own thing that's probably gumming up the works in one way or another, which is why you delayed it in the first place. I want to know, the Isaac Childres, right? You are the Gloomhaven guy. You are so tied to this game and this setting, this universe, this experience, and it's clear that you absolutely love it. But if you could step back and say, you know what, this is a project just for me that's entirely independent of Gloomhaven, what's a type of game that you would want to take a crack at? You could be like, oh, I want to do a train game next, or something that's trading in the Mediterranean. I don't know, but if you didn't have the pressure and expectation that was associated with Gloomhaven, what's a project that you could see yourself working on in a different timeline?
I mean, I've definitely thought about a train game. I've been really getting into like 18xx recently.
Perfect. I love it.
But yeah, I mean, I try to give myself time for that sort of thing as well. Not so much recently, but I mean, like Founders of Gloomhaven,
Of
the
course.
game that came out after Gloomhaven was very much just like a passion project. It was like, yeah, I want to make like this weird logistics game, and so I made it. And so like after like I'm finished with Frosthaven, I'll probably do something similar then as well. Like not a game similar to Founders of Gloomhaven, but just like another like passion project that that's is just something that I want to make that isn't a dungeon crawl game.
Okay, let's talk about a train game in the Gloomhaven universe. How are we going to make this work, Isaac? I need this co-design credit. No.
I don't know. It could happen. Anything could happen, really.
Pax Pahaven. That's our next way. We're going to get Cole Worley in here, and we're going to really nail this down.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but before like Jaws of the Lion heated up, and now the Frosthaven Kickstarter was on the horizon. I was working on like a game that was sort of based on my time as a physics grad student.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like this worker placement thing where you were like a group of physicists who like opened a rift to a parallel dimension, and you were like placing workers in two separate universes. And I want to go back to that game at some point for sure. I'd gotten like pretty far with it, but I wasn't super happy with some of the aspects of it. But yeah, I want to get back to that at some point.
Well, it is an exciting road that you have ahead of you. Like, I can't imagine the work that is going to be involved in making a game this big. And clearly, there's already a ton that's designed, but you have a lot of expectation riding on your shoulders. So I'm really looking forward to Jaws of the Lion. I'm looking forward to Frosthaven, and I'm looking forward to whatever 18xx train game or, whatever you have down the road. I did have one last question about future content, and that's the expansions. Do you view Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, Jaws of the Lion as three unique entities that will receive their own expanded content, or do you view these as like one unified thing that future expansions are going to be for the overall Gloomhaven experience?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it too much. I mean, I know like we'll probably do a similar thing with Frosthaven that we did with like Forgotten Circles for Gloomhaven, so there will probably be something like that for Frosthaven at some point in the future. But I don't know. That's really as far as I've gotten in terms of expansion. Thinking about expansions, I don't know. I've never liked expansions too much. Like Gloomhaven was kind of like almost designed as like a response to like expansions and like sort of the Fantasy Flight model of just like a core game and then like 20 different expansions on top of it.
And we all thank you for this.
I just wanted to make Gloomhaven as like basically like a game plus 10 expansions in itself. And so yeah, I mean, I don't really want to like focus too much as a company on expansion content necessarily, but just like give people like new big giant things to play with.
Well, it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing, and I can't wait for it. So thank you so much for coming on to the show, Isaac. Everyone out there, be sure to check out the Frosthaven Kickstarter going up live March 31st, which if you're watching this video, it probably is posting on that very same day or maybe slightly before or after. I don't know. COVID has a lot of impacts on a lot of things, and stay tuned for Jaws of the Lion. And thank you once again, Isaac, for coming on to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this video, we have all kinds of other reviews, interviews, and recommendations via writing, podcasts, and video here on our channel and website, cardboardherald.com. Our content is audience supported, so if you want to show your support, please visit our Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Cardboard Herald.